We're here on a windy Cooper River Bridge overlooking the Charleston Harbor area. Behind me is downtown Charleston. On the other side of the camera is Mount Pleasant, and we're on this giant bridge. And I gotta tell you, I don't love heights, so my feet are firmly planted. I feel a tingle coming up my spine just standing up here. I don't love it, but what I do appreciate is the incredible amount of engineering it took to create this massive bridge. It lasts almost 3 miles long. And a team of people came together, architects and engineers, and they designed this beautiful design. And one of the things I found as I looked into this bridge was that in engineering terms, there's a term called factor of safety. And the factor of safety is the difference between whatever could be on this bridge, the weight and the forces and the wind and all the things that could ever impact this bridge. The difference between that maximum amount and the design amount for how much the bridge can actually withstand. So if this entire bridge was covered in 18-wheelers during a hurricane, what's the maximum amount of engineering we would need to keep the bridge upright? But then engineers actually make it stronger than that. They say, well, this is what we might possibly ever need, but here's what we're going to design this building to, this structure, this incredible piece of engineering to withstand. And, you know, for really important things, right? Carrying humans, carrying cargo, cars, like it's very important that there be a margin of safety. But some things in our life, it doesn't really matter, right? Like when your kid draws you a picture at church and they said, oh, put this on the fridge, or from school, and you stick it on the fridge with a magnet. It doesn't matter if that magnet just barely holds up that paper, because all that's gonna happen if the magnet fails is the paper falls to the ground, you hang it right back up, no problem, right? But the more important the thing in our life, the more margin of safety we need between what's the maximum we think we need and what is actually designed to withstand. And in this series, that's what we're looking at in our lives. We're saying, what are the areas in which we need to create a margin that allows, no matter what comes in our life, we're going to be able to withstand it. Life isn't an engineering project. Sometimes it actually feels a lot more like juggling, right? So we have one responsibility and it's easy to balance that thing. Maybe we focus on our jobs or our children or our marriage or any of these individual things. But as time passes, other things pop up. And we realize that we can't accomplish all of our goals because no matter what's going on, there's always things going on. And we start juggling life, and then what happens is it falls. Things fall apart for us. Maybe we have goals to learn an instrument or have a date night or all the different things that we can set our mind on, but there's just not enough time to do everything. And so what ends up happening is in times of stress, things get dropped. Maybe you're a single parent trying to do it all by yourself, or you're dealing with a transition at work or the added pressure of health issues. When more often than we're comfortable with, we push our limits. But when that happens for too long, without margin, disaster will strike. So how do we create a factor of safety in all the different roles that we have to play so that we can avoid this disaster? Today we're looking together at how to juggle our responsibilities at home and our relationships, the push and pull of jobs and other responsibilities, and specifically the home and work tension. Keeping our home life and our close relationships is something that we need to prioritize and recognize, because we are who we are, not what we do. We're so much more than the things that we accomplish professionally. In Ephesians chapter 5, Paul writes to the Ephesians and he says, to imitate Christ, to live like Him. He says, walk in love as Christ loved us and gave up Himself for us, a fragrant offering and a sacrifice to God. Then down in verse 16 he says, look how carefully then you walk, not as unwise, but as wise, making the best use of the time, because the days are evil. And then even jumping down to verse 25 of chapter 5. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave Himself up for her. Christ modeled for us in the way He lived and cared deeply for those around Him, how we should live, even and especially in times of trouble. He lived sacrificially And that's the mindset we need to take in our family and our close relationships. The truth is, though, there are very few roles that we have for our entire life that no one else will have. And these are the important ones. Our job, someone's going to have my job after me. Someone's going to have my desk and my title. They're going to do the thing I do. But my wife is not going to have another husband. My kids will only have me as their earthly father. My parents will only have me as their son. These are the roles and relationships that last for a lifetime. And they're vitally important because if they get stressed to the point of failure, the results can be catastrophic and long-lasting. This bridge behind me was built with a margin of safety to make failure not an option. The question is, are you doing your best to build margin around the important relationships in your life? Knowing the cost of failure in our relationships, are we making room? Are we intentionally making our close relationships a priority? Because Paul tells husbands to love like Christ, giving himself up for her. What exactly is involved in giving yourself up for someone else? What do we give up? I love how Andy Stanley puts this. He says, relationships thrive when there is space between your performance and your limits. Relationships thrive when there is space between your performance and your limits. So I ask you the question, how much space is there between your performance and your responsibilities and your limits? Are you always operating at 99% where there's no space left for relationships? There's no space left for those close to you. And then a second question, are you comfortable with performing at 90% at work? Are you comfortable performing not at your full capacity at work in order to have healthier relationships? But so often we know what happens, right? Our margin gets squeezed by our work, by our other responsibilities. And why is this so? Because no one gets awards for being great at home. No one ever got a Dad of the Year award and a 20% raise for being a good husband, right? It's harder to track that progress and success. It's a little less measurable. But it's so incredibly worth it whenever we have the right priorities. So how do we know when we're burning too much of our margin at work and we're cutting attention and priority and our responsibilities away from our family and close relationships? We start saying certain things like, I'll be home earlier next week, or don't worry, I'll be able to come to a game before the season's finished. I'll come to the next one. I remember a few years ago when Kara and I were living in Texas and there was a particularly busy season of work for me. And I told her a few different times, I was like, look, if we can just make it through these next couple of weeks, things are going to slow down. And then about a month later, I'd say, hey, if we can just make it through the next couple of weeks, things are going to slow down. And after hearing this a few different times, one day she said, no, it won't. And I was like, what do you mean? Yeah, it will. Look at the schedule. She said, you've been saying this for weeks and it never slows down. And what she was pointing out to me was that I was looking to the future to try to make up for past and the present. I was looking, this will all be worth it in the end. Once this project is done, I'll be home more. And if you find yourself saying things like this a lot, this is a red flashing light in your life that you might be juggling too much without margin. Because there's never enough time to do it all. In the parable of the sower, Jesus warns against becoming distracted and misplacing our priorities on things that are not as important. The parable of the sower is found in Matthew chapter 13. Jesus says this, he says, other seed fell among the thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. And later in verse 22, Jesus describes what this meant. He said to his disciples, the seed falling among the thorns refers to someone who hears the word, but the worries of this life and the deceitfulness of the wealth choke the word, making it unfruitful. And that seed was unfruitful because it became distracted by worry and other things. So it was never able to become what it was intended to be, something that bears fruit. The fruit of your life is much more than your production at your job. I am more and you are more than what you do, than what you produce. Each of us leaves a legacy. A legacy isn't our performance reviews at work, our salaries, how big our house is, or how nice our car is. Our nameplate will disappear. But a story, a history will be told about our life. And if that legacy consists mainly of our professional achievements and not how we treated our loved ones and our family, it's going to be a short story that no one reads. But a life lived with margin, with a factor of safety built in to protect and nourish our close family and relationships, that is a legacy that honors Jesus. Once again, I'd like to read Paul's words in Ephesians. Walk in love as Christ loved us and gave himself up for us, a fragrant offering and sacrifice to God. Take some time together this week as a group and go through the discussion questions. I hope you have an amazing time together this week with your group.